Good morning, everybody. So we will discuss about program testing in 6 hours. Today we'll spend 2 hours and subsequently another 4 hours. Programs are manually written most of the time and therefore they are likely to contain defects. But what are the techniques that are available to reduce defects? Okay, the important techniques are review, testing, formal specification verification, and using a proper development process, design technique, and so on. The review, formal specification, verification, etc., they normally don't require code execution, whereas testing needs code execution, and therefore it's a dynamic technique. On the other hand, review, etc., these are static techniques. And testing has been acknowledged as one of the very effective ways to remove most of the, to detect and help remove most of the bugs in a software. Unless a software is properly tested, the consequence can be very costly. Just look at this one, the Ariane rocket. This was developed and launched by the European countries. They were trying to launch multiple satellites at the same time. And the Ariane 5 rocket, once it was launched, within 37 seconds, it just ended up in a ball of fire. And then they tried to reconstruct what really happened, because this was a very expensive mission. Upwards of $1 billion was invested in building it. The problem was that the Ariane was developed, Ariane 1, Ariane 2, and so on, and each version of the spacecraft was more powerful, and initially the speed was not very high, and therefore a 16-bit signed integer was enough. But later, when the speed increased, they did use a 64-bit floating point to get the speed and other parameters, but then internally for the software to work, because they were changing the software, maintaining it to work with a new version of the spacecraft, and there they had not taken care, and therefore the conversion of the 64-bit floating point to 16-bit signed integer, there was a problem, and then the rocket self-destructed because this specific thing they did not check before launching. So even though testing is expensive, takes time, but unless we do it thoroughly, the consequence can be very bad. But then the first question that anybody would ask, that how do you test a program? Even anybody goes to an interview and says that he knows about testing, done some course. The first question possibly the interviewer will ask is that how do you test a program? The answer is that you have to give some inputs and then observe the output, and then you have a mental model of what should be the output, and if it doesn't match your expectation, then you will say that there is a failure of the software. But just observing the failure doesn't really tell you that where exactly is the problem in the code. That you have to do via debugging. So when you test a program, you can see that the program failed for some test cases, but then later you will have to debug to identify what exactly was the problem and determine the bug. So normally after you execute a test case, you would observe it, and then if it doesn't match with what it's supposed to do, then you note down the conditions under which failed, when conditions under which you gave the input, and you prepare a test report. And this test report is later used for debugging and then correcting the error. So the role of the developer and tester is nicely brought about by this cartoon. The developer's perspective is, how can I make it? So you construct the software, and the developer is also an equally proficient programmer. He does write programs and has good experience in programming, and he is sitting on this side and he is trying to break it. He is just concentrating on breaking the code that he is writing, and then as soon as he breaks it, says that the code has problem and passes on to the developer, and the developer again makes it. So these are the two perspectives of the developer versus the tester. And the testing requires special skills. For example, you might have to, a tester has to think of situations under which a bug can occur. Just look at this cartoon. How to spot a tester in a supermarket. So there is a customer who goes to the counter, and then it says that I am getting an error at the self-service counter. And then the person at the customer service says, how do you know what might have caused the error? What did you do that it caused the error? He says, yes, in the prompt to enter the number of bags I used, I entered this large number here. And then the customer service says, why did you enter that number? Then he says, I don't know. So he has that knack of breaking the system, and that's the attitude of the tester. But one thing is that what is so hard about testing? If it is just about giving input and observing output, then there is nothing very challenging about testing. Just keep on giving inputs, observing. But the problem is, one of the problem is as follows. Let's try to consider testing a simple function, two-line function, check equal. In this check equal function takes two integers and then returns 0 or 1 depending on whether the integers are equal or not. And let's assume that this is a 64-bit computer. So the integers take 64-bit representation, and therefore the total combinations of the input values x and y will be 2 to the power 1 to 8. And this is a very large number. Assume that somebody enters numbers very fast. Let's say in 10 seconds he is able to type integers, and he just keeps on typing one combination after other. So it will take him to enter all values about 1 billion years. But then you might argue that why not have these numbers generated automatically, all these possible combinations, and quickly enter in the program. But then, as we will see, that automatic testing has its own problem. In this simple case, yes, we can enter the values and we can also observe the output. But in many cases, it's hard to determine what are the values to be entered and also check whether the result is correct. Those are non-trivial problems. So this is on the lighter side. Another cartoon about testing, and this is a Dilbert cartoon, and somehow this Dilbert cartoon, they have the author Scott Adams has a very good understanding about how the testing and software development works. So just see here that the developer here, Wally, is given his program for testing to the tester, and the tester after some time appears here and then says, my quality assurance review of your beta product turned up a few bugs, and I have classified the bugs by their severity level, lethal, boneheaded and vexing. Because the bugs were too many, he classified the bugs into different types, and then he is just taking a look at the bugs and he says, all I see are the lethal and vexing bugs. Where are the boneheaded bugs? So it says that, I am trying to rent a stadium to hold the printout. So the number of bugs are extremely large, and if you can see the latter bugs, they are the boneheaded bugs. Actually, that is his classification. We don't normally classify by this severity level of lethal, boneheaded and vexing. This is just a cartoon, remember that. But what about the number of bugs that a typical programmer commits? In company, studies show that experienced programmers commit 50 errors per 1000 lines of source code. So after extreme careful programming, following all processes and so on, still every 1000 lines of source code has 50 errors. And then most of these errors are eliminated by good testing. So if the testing is good, it eliminates most of these 50 errors, and only about one error still remains. And then the product is released after designing it well, and then sometime the customer or the user might notice that there is a problem and would report, and then this gets corrected. But then the problem with software is that it just keeps on evolving. More and more features are added, and these corrections of the bug may also create further bugs, and therefore bugs are detected and corrected throughout the life cycle. So on the source code, bugs are present. Whatever you do, the best programmers still have bugs and have to do testing to eliminate almost all of that. Few remain and to be determined to form later. But what about the error distribution? Again, the studies show that majority of the error, 60%, come from specification and design problems, and 40% from code problems. And because the customers are very concerned about the quality of the software, almost every company spends huge effort on testing. At least 50% of the total effort is spent on testing. And if you go to any company, you will find that the number of testers are very large compared to the developers. But what's the implication? Implication is that there are more testers, and if you do testing well and you specialize in testing, then there are more job opportunities. And as you will see that testing is very challenging work, maybe much more than the development. We'll see the nitty-gritty of testing and see that there are a lot of challenges here. It's a very nice, good career area. But just observe here that in testing, companies typically spend about 50% of the development effort, and then at the end of the development cycle, they can afford only 10% of the development time. So how is it possible that in 10% of the development time, they are able to spend 50% of the effort? Okay, the answer is that as we already said, that the number of testers are much more. So testing can be carried out parallelly. There are a lot more parallel activities that are possible here, whereas development, writing code are more sequential. Less parallel activities are possible in specification, design and code compared to testing. In testing, much more parallel activity opportunities exist, and therefore can have a larger manpower here and do it in shorter time, but still have 50% of the development effort. The testing activities are getting more and more complex every year. Why is that? Reason is programs themselves are becoming large and complex. Newer programming paradigms, web-based and so on, client server, and also increasingly test automation is being used. Let's look at the testing facts, and we said that, so we're just discussing this, that testing is becoming more complex every year, and one of the culprit is that the programs themselves are becoming complex, and new types of programs are being used, and also the test automation. So as you will see that automatic tools are increasingly being used. There are more and more powerful tools becoming available. We will look at some of those tools as we proceed in the course. Let's see how the testing has evolved over last 60 years. Initially, 1960s, the programs used to be small, and there used to be the programmer who, one or two programmers who took the entire responsibility of developing program, and it was under their intellectual grasp of writing the program, the entire code, and then they used to take pride and they say, just see here, what I have done the coding, and now you want to test it. Why do you want to test it? I have myself written the code, and we have not got any time anyway. So the programmers were thinking that testing is not necessary because they have taken enough care in writing the code, and those days the programs were small and it worked. If the programmer was careful, himself as confident about the code, need not test it. But in later 1990s, the programs become larger and more complex, and then the programmers slowly accepted the idea that testing has to be done. Just see here, okay, maybe you are right about testing. It looks like a nasty bug made its way into the live environment, and now the customers are complaining. So the programmers became more agreeable to testing the code. And then 2000 onwards, just see here, testers must work harder, longer and faster. So there was a large team, or the code was more complex, and therefore testing is a very important technique for removing errors, and that has been realized. So that's the cartoonist view. But then initially in 1980s, 70s and so on, testing required only entering values and executing and observing and so on. Not too much challenge. But then over the years it has become extremely challenging. Testing has taken a center stage in all types of software development, and testing has become sophisticated. There are many techniques that have become available in last 20 years, and anybody who wants a testing career requires to have a good knowledge of test techniques. It's not just entering some values and checking out the result. And also the test automation, need to know these test tools and how to write scripts, execute and so on. Then some of the persons in the development, they do view testers as trying to break their code, and this is the kind of the cartoonist view of a tester. And as we were saying, that both testers and developers are competent programmers, and the developers develop the system and give it to the testers. The testers find problem, throw it back to the developers. The developers fix it and again give it to the tester. Testers find problem, give it back and so on. So that's a perspective of a cartoonist. But does the testing activity take place at the end? In a waterfall model, the answer is yes. Initially, there is hardly any testing activity during specification, design. The testers are needed after the code has been unit tested, and integration and system testing used to be done by the testers. But in the recent development processes, like the agile processes, rational unified process and so on, the testing activity nowadays is spread all over the development cycle. So what do the testers do initially? When the code is not available, unit testing. So they design the test cases. design and conduct integration testing, define and conduct usability testing, define and conduct acceptance testing. So the activities are more evenly spread over the entire development cycle, and the testers are there associated with the project from the beginning. Whereas in the older development cycles, the testers were needed towards the end of the development cycle. Now this is a basic, very basic concept. We'll say that it is the zeroth concept. Anybody knows anything about testing might know this. So when you test something, you observe the failure, you don't observe the error. You might see something like this: error, program will now terminate. So this is a symptom of the error or a manifestation of the error. You are not seeing the error, you are seeing the failure. The error is there in the code, you don't see it. You are seeing the failure. And sometimes even if there is an error in code, it may not cause a failure. Why? Because the input data may be such that the error doesn't come out. The error is there, but maybe if that data is allowed to be entered, then there will be an error. Error is also synonymously called as a defect, a bug. So these are synonymous terms: error, defect and bug. Now another basic question: as you keep on testing, the testers keep on testing, they keep on finding bugs. But how long do they test? Will they keep on testing for months together? Okay. One is that initially the rate of bugs detection is large, and as the time progresses, see the slope here, initially very steep slope, and then the rate of detection of bugs reduces, and that's the time when one can stop testing. Another way to know when to stop testing is to initially put some bugs, known bugs. The developers or the test manager, he just puts some bugs which he knows and sees whether all of them have got detected or most of them have got detected. Then he knows that the known bugs have got detected, and therefore possibly the unknown bugs have also got detected. Now this is again a Dilbert cartoon. So this cartoon is about the time pressure and the testers. So towards the end of the development cycle, most of the testing takes place, and then there is a pressure on them to really complete so that the product can be released. Now let's see this cartoon. So this is at a call center. So the manager says and tells Carl, reduce your average call time on your history or your history. Reduce your average call time or your history, you will be chucked out. So then the customer here, he just rings up the call center, and then this call center employee takes and says, what? I have a question about your product. Then he has been told to do it faster. He says, faster, faster. And then he says, it's about the interface. And then the call center employee says, okay, great, thanks. And he just ends the conversation. So now the number of calls he is able to handle is much more. He has speeded up really. And at the end of the month, the manager says, your average call time is way down and you get a bonus. So just see, he is smiling here. But then on the second thought says, maybe it is a mistake to do this job while I study for the priesthood. So he is feeling guilty that he is doing this. Now there is another basic concept before we started with testing methodologies, tools and so on. Let's see the difference between verification and validation. This is also a very basic level question. What's the difference between verification and validation? Verification is the process of determining whether output of one phase of development conforms to its previous phase. At every phase of development, the development team produces some output, and whether that output, like the design phase, there will be a design document, and whether the design document conforms to its previous phase, which is a specification. So whether the design conforms to specification, checking that is called as verification. And on the other hand, validation is determining whether a fully developed system conforms to its SRS document. So after the system has been fully developed, you check whether the development system is actually conforming to the SRS document. So that's the validation. So what are the techniques for verification? How can one verify? What techniques are used? Okay. One is review. Review is a verification technique. Specification review, design review, code review, etc. And simulation, yes, design simulation, etc. These are done to verify whether it's according to the specification. Yes, simulation is also a verification technique. But what about unit testing? Will it be a verification or a validation technique? Okay, unit testing, we don't really validate the fully developed system against its SRS document. No. So unit testing is also a verification, whereas system testing is a validation technique. So if we look at the aim of verification and validation, verification is concerned with phase containment of errors, keep on reducing defects on the intermediate documents that are produced, the specification document, design document, etc. Whereas the aim of validation is to make the final product error free. So here is a comparison between verification and validation. So the main aim of verification is to check whether you are building the product right. Every step is okay or not. Whereas validation, whether you have built the right product. So it is at the end of the development that validation takes place. Verification checks whether an artifact conforms to its previous artifact, whereas validation checks the final product against the specification. Verification is typically carried out by the developers, whereas validation is done by the testers. And verification typically consists of static activities like reviews, walkthrough, simulation, inspection, etc. Whereas testing is a dynamic activity where we need to execute the software and check against the requirements. Now again, another basic concept, the test levels. Testing is typically done in 3 levels: unit, integration, and system testing. In unit testing, each module which is a unit or a component is tested independent of the others. So a unit can be a function, a unit can be a module, unit can be a component, and these are tested independent of the other functions or other modules or other components. And this is carried out mostly by the developers themselves. They test the unit that they have developed. Whereas integration testing, these take the unit tested units, the tested units here, and then these are integrated and typically done by a separate team, the test team or the quality assurance team. What about acceptance testing? Acceptance testing is the validation of the system by the customers. So if we write down what are the activities that take place during the system and integration testing. You'll see that the activities consist of test suite design, run test cases, check results to detect failures, prepare the failure list, which test cases failed, and then later the failure list is examined to find out the exact error which is debugging to locate the error and correct errors. So, these are the activities that take place during integration and system testing. And if you see here, these are the activities from test suite design to prepare failure list. These are the activities carried out by the tester, and as they give the failure list, the developers debug and correct the errors. Now, let us see a quiz. So, as testing proceeds, the test team tests the software, they find more and more bugs. But how do they know when to stop testing? Because the more testing they conduct, the more bugs they will detect. And they have to stop somewhere, or at least they can anticipate that if we test more, possibly another 15 days, maybe we will find more bugs and so on. So, when do they stop? So, this point, it would be nice if somebody answers, but this point actually we had discussed that there are two techniques. One is by observing what is the rate of error detection. As long as the slope, from a steep slope it becomes more parallel, then they know that they have to stop. And other is by error seeding. The test manager initially seeds some bugs, and as the seeded bugs are all or most of them are detected, he knows that it is time to stop testing. But what are the types of bugs that are detected during unit testing, integration testing and system testing? Can you give one example of a bug that is detected during unit testing, and a bug that would be detected during integration testing, and another example of a bug that will be detected during system testing? So, as we know that the objective of unit testing is to check a unit. Unit can be a function, unit can be a module or a component. So, unit testing may be the unit did not function as required, maybe it was an error that it was a sorting, and as you gave input it did not sort properly for some cases, or it may be a searching code, a searching function, and then for some values it did not search properly, gave wrong answer, etc. But what about an integration testing bug example? Okay, in integration testing the units are integrated, and the main objective here, see here the units have been tested already. So, units are assumed to not contain much bug, and integration testing, the focus is to find bugs in the interface between units. So, what can be examples of bugs? Parameters passed to a unit are not proper, parameter mismatch, etc. What are the bugs that can be detected during system testing? Okay, so far performance was not a factor here. System testing, the non-functional requirements, these are very important. These are simple examples of bugs that can be detected during system testing. Now, let us see unit testing. Unit testing, we said that these are modules, functions or components, and these are tested in isolation. But the main question that arises here is that why have unit testing? Why not do a good system testing? Why do this unit integration, etc. over a long time? Why not have a good test team, a big test team put together? They just finally do the system testing. Okay, the answer is here. The answer is that nobody does that. Nobody does only system testing, because even though you might detect many of the bugs during system testing, but then each time you detect a bug, each time you detect a failure, to identify the bug would be very difficult, because you have this entire program, and then to where is the bug, to locate that would be very time consuming. In a unit, the code is small, and once a failure is detected, it's much easier to detect the bug. So in integration testing, you have these modules or units which have been tested, and then you integrate them using some integration strategy or integration plan, maybe these initially and then add these later and test it again and so on. So each time the partially integrated system is tested, each integration step. So in system testing, okay, in integration testing, the main types of bugs that are targeted are interface compatibility, that is whether the parameters that are required by a unit, whether you are giving the, whether it is expecting a int parameter and then the calling function is giving a float parameter, whether there is an unexpected parameter, values, it was expecting a integer and you're given a pointer, the state of interaction, runtime exceptions, etc. These are the bug types that are targeted during integration testing. Whereas system testing works on the entire, testing the entire system, and then each time you do the integration testing, you do the build and smoke test. This is also a term where you just do each time you build, just to check whether things are proper, it can be taken up for testing. Do a smoke test. So a smoke test is a simple test to check whether it is worthy of testing. System testing, as we will see later, there are two types of system testing. One is to check the functionality and the other is performance, because performance is hardly checked during unit integration test. It's checked during system testing, and even the functionality is checked based on the user requirements. Just remember that the SRS document has two main parts. One part is the functional requirements, and we design the functionality test based on the functional requirements. And the other part of the SRS document is the non-functional requirements, and we design the performance test based on the non-functional requirements. And then the system testing, three types: alpha, beta and acceptance test. Depending on who does that system testing, if the developers do the system testing, it's called as alpha testing. The developed system is undergoing alpha testing. We say that when the developers are doing the system test, then it is a set of customers, friendly customers doing the testing, this beta testing, and then finally the customer who is going to buy it is checking whether the system is working correctly. That is acceptance testing, when the customer himself tests it. And the performance test, there are many types of performance tests that are done. For example, response time, throughput, usability, stress, under stress does it work correctly, recovery, configuration, etc. As we proceed, we will see the performance tests in more detail. And the acceptance testing is done by the user, checks whether to accept the delivered system or to reject it based on the test results. Now let's see who tests the software. Okay, Software is tested by the developers or the programmers who do test, carry out the unit testing, develop their own code, and also maybe other programmers' code that test it. The users, they do the usability and acceptance testing, and also user volunteers they carry out the beta testing. And the test team or the quality assurance personnel, they do all types of testing except the unit and acceptance testing. So that includes integration testing, system testing, and they develop a test plan and strategy. So the testing activity is carried out by the programmers, users, and the test team. Now the question comes is that why not developers also do the testing, that is integration and system testing? The answer is that the developers, they understand their own system, so they should be good testers actually, but then unfortunately they tend to test the software gently because they have written it, and they are driven by delivery that they would have to complete and deliver, etc. Whereas an independent tester, he doesn't know the code very well possibly, but then he learns the system, but then he sincerely attempts to break the system and is driven by quality. It passes through him, then it must have been thoroughly tested. That's his objective. Now this is another basic thing. So normally called as the pesticide effect. So the problem is like this, that a farmer was sowing a cotton crop. He was planted cotton crop and then found that there were pests, and then he got DDT. Somebody told him that, see, the pests will destroy your cotton crop, you spray DDT. So he sprayed DDT and then he got some crop, and but then 90% of the pests were killed, 10% survived. And then next year he again planted cotton crop. But then those pests which had escaped the DDT, further application of DDT did nothing to them, and he was totally perplexed how to save his crop. And somebody said, see, you cannot apply the same pesticide every year, you apply malathion. So the farmer, he applied malathion, and then of those who survived, 90% of the bugs that got destroyed by applying malathion, but 10% survived malathion. They are immune to malathion. So further application of malathion will do nothing to them. And then next year when he planted the crop, if he used malathion or DDT, it will not be effective. He has to apply a new pesticide. So testing is very similar. The bugs that escape one testing will not be detected by further application of that testing technique. So let's say you do unit testing and some bugs will escape unit testing, or let's say path coverage testing, and some bugs escape the path coverage testing. But then doing a thorough path coverage testing again will not really detect those bugs. You will have to use a combinatorial testing or something. So this is what it says, this diagram, that these are the testing techniques. See the blue rectangles here. So these are the bugs which have come here. Now you did this testing, and then some bugs survived, and then if you use the same testing technique here, they will not detect them. You apply a new testing technique. Maybe I should have used different color here to show that it's a new testing technique. and then some of the bugs will get killed. But then after the bugs are detected, they are fixed, and therefore new bugs may enter during fixing because the bugs are not fixed properly. So that's the process. So each time you do testing, some bugs are detected, some percentage, some escape. Further application of that testing technique will not detect it. You need to apply another testing technique. So this is the Capers-Jones rule of thumb. Says that each of the software review, inspection and test step, each test step, so each test technique will find 30% of the bugs present at that time. So that was his observation. In IEEE Computer 1996, he mentioned that each time you apply a bug removal technique, you will be able to catch 30% and 70% will escape that technique. So you need to apply multiple test techniques. Now let's see one example. That assume that you have used 4 bug detection techniques, maybe 4 test methodologies, and assume that these work very well, even though Capers-Jones observation is that they detect 30% only. Let's assume that ours is able to detect 70% of the bugs. So initially there are 1000 bugs and our test techniques are 70% efficient. So after applying all the 4 bug detection techniques, test methodologies, after applying 4 test methodologies, how many bugs will survive at the end? Okay, the answer is not very hard. Each time you apply, 30% survive, 70% are eliminated. Therefore, 1000 into 0.3 to the power 4 is about 81 bugs survive by applying the 4 bug detection techniques. So just see here, the number of techniques have to be applied much larger to really reduce this bug count here, even with 70% detection efficiency. But Capers-Jones estimate is only 30% get detected. Now let's try to do this problem. Let's assume that in some development, testing is carried over in 5 testing stages using different techniques, and each stage detects 60% of the defects present at that time, and once a testing step is complete, bug fixing is carried out, and each bug fix has a 15% chance of creating a new bug. So assume initially that the number of bugs present in the program is 1000. So how many bugs are expected to remain after all the 5 testing stages have been complete? How do we do this? Can anybody attempt? We are using 5 testing stages. Each stage is 60% efficient, detect 60% of the defects present at that time, 40% escape. But then those 60% you detect, they have to be fixed. And when bug fix is carried out, there is a 15% chance of creating a new bug. And initially, when it was given to the testers, there were 1000 bugs. So how many bugs will remain after the 5 testing stages are complete? So this is another cartoon, testing cartoon. It's a Dilbert cartoon. So this is the manager says that in phase 1 we will tell our customers that the system failure won't happen again, and if there are problems that happen, then we will act surprised. We will say, how come failure occurred? We tested it well. And then we will say that a software patch is being installed. So, and then this is Ashok. He says, we are bad people. So basically he is not trying to test well, and he is just trying to make a plan about how to handle the customer. Now let's have another quiz here. This is a iterative waterfall development process. Now in this process, when are the verification undertaken? At what points are verification undertaken? When is testing undertaken? When is validation undertaken? So these are three questions that are being asked on this model. When is verification undertaken? So verification, as we discussed earlier, is undertaken throughout the development cycle. During at the end of requirements analysis, design, coding, etc. But when is testing undertaken? Okay, testing during coding, unit testing is undertaken. Yes, testing takes place here, that is unit testing. And also during the testing phase, integration and system testing take place. So it takes place during coding, which is unit testing, and during testing, which is integration and system testing. When is validation undertaken? Okay, validation takes place at the towards the end of the testing phase, that is system testing. We had said that system testing is the validation testing. When we talk of testing, one important life cycle model is the V life cycle model. This life cycle model pays special attention to testing compared to waterfall model. Now let's see this model very quickly. It's a variant of waterfall model, emphasizes verification and validation. Unlike the waterfall model, here testing activities are spread over the entire life cycle, and in every phase of development, testing activities are planned in parallel with the development. So as development occurs, every phase testing, test planning or some test activities take place. So as in the requirements phase, as the requirements get defined, it is possible to design the system and acceptance tests. So the system acceptance tests, the testers, they design it here, even though they execute it here. During the high level design and the architectural design, they carry out the integration test plan, integration test cases, and then they execute it here. During the detailed design, the unit testing plan is carried out, and that's executed here. So this just summarizes that during requirement, system and acceptance testing, design, integration testing. So V model, it emphasizes testing throughout the life cycle, verification and validation of the software, and for developing high quality software, safety critical software, etc. V model is known to be having good strength in that each deliverable is made testable and also easy to use. But if we look at the weakness here, there are many weaknesses here. We did not see iteration there. What happens if some bugs escape a stage, does not support overlapping of the phases, does not easily handle change to requirements, does not support risk analysis, etc. These are the shortcomings. So V model is a natural choice for systems requiring high reliability, safety critical software, embedded control applications, and when all requirements are known upfront, they will not change, but if requirements change later, then V model is not very suitable. If the solution and technology may also change, it's not a good model. Now let's discuss a few more testing concepts before we look at the test methodologies. So how do we know, once a software is tested thoroughly, how do we know that how many errors still remain? Okay, it's studied by several researchers. They conclude that 85% of errors are removed at the end of a testing cycle. So after all testing is carried out, the testers are happy that they have tested it well. Still there are 15% errors remaining. For software that are used in life critical applications, this is not sufficient. But then can't we do better than this? Okay, the main problem here is that all practical test techniques are basically heuristics. As you will see, the test techniques, they are based on some heuristics. They help us to reduce errors, but they do not guarantee complete error removal. So being a tester, we must remember this, that the base testing that we do, still there are 15% errors that might remain. So just see here, there is a aircraft which is largely automated, and then the air hostess says that 85% of the errors have got corrected, and then would you take a ride on that aircraft? No. So 85% is not good enough for critical applications. So then how do we go about for critical applications? Okay, see, testing is one of the error removal techniques. In the first slide we had said that there are many other error removal techniques. We had identified 4 of them. So we will have to use them, all the 4, to the maximum for safety critical software. Testing is not enough. We will look at the automated testing later in some detail, but in this introductory hour, let's see how the test automation has evolved over the years. In the early years of 1960 to 1990, mostly the test cases were given by the tester manually, and also execution was carried out manually. But during this decade, 1990 to 2000, the capture and replay techniques came up. So basically, many of the test cases have to be run again and again. Why is that? Because each time the tester finds a problem, gives it to the developers fix it and give it back to the tester, and the tester have to check whether it can now pass those test cases. So during each time the developers give back the system to the tester, they have to run the same test cases. So they keep on running the same test cases, maybe 50, 100 times, and each time manually entering and executing is time consuming. And during 1990 to 2000, the capture replay test tools were developed. So here the idea is that once you enter some values, the tool captures those values, and also it captures the result produced. So if you said that the result is correct, it will remember what was the correct result. And then next time you want to run the same test case, you just ask the tool to run all those test cases. It will automatically input those values and also check the output. But then the problem here is that the first time the tester has to give the values manually. The other times it will run replay it. Another category of tools that came up were the scripting tools. So here you write the test cases, not only design the test cases, but also write scripts that tell how to input the test cases, the test input values, and how to check the output, etc. that you write in the form of a small program. And then later 2000 onwards, we have this model based testing, where based on the design, the test data is generated and also the test results are checked. We'll see this, spend some time towards the end of our lecture. So various testing tools have come up: the GUI, business logic, the persistence or the database layer, the web interface. This is the standalone GUI interface. Many tools here: JUnit, Selenium is a very important web-based testing tool. JMeter for testing GUI based, JUnit performance, load testing, etc. As we proceed, we'll have a look at some of these tools. But then one thing we must remember, as brought out by this cartoon, even though you automate, still you detect only the bugs. Sorry, you detect the failures. Debugging and correcting still remains. So automatic testing don't kill the bugs. Finally, the programmer kills the bug. So that's what nicely captured by this cartoon, that even with automatic test, we'll see that automatic testing is advanced quite a bit, but then still there are a big amount of manual work there, and even then the debugging and correcting is entirely manual. The programmer has to do it. Another basic concept is about a fault model. So a fault model is what kind of faults occur on a specific artifact. Let's say code. If your program is not using files, then file related problems cannot occur in that. If it is not having a GUI problems can be ruled out, etc. So a fault model varies from program to program. Let's look at an object oriented program. So a fault model is the types of faults that can occur there. So there can be structural faults or algorithm faults. For example, the algorithm may be wrong, even though your coding etc. is perfect, but the algorithm you used is wrong. So it might result in inadequate performance or incorrect result. Structural faults can be procedural faults, traceability faults, object oriented faults, etc. So we can categorize the type of faults that can exist in a program. Now, before we start discussing about the test methodologies for software, you must remember that hardware testing has lot of things that can be learned from, but one problem is that the hardware fault model is very simple. The software fault model, there are thousands of different types of faults that can occur, whereas in hardware fault model is either stock at 0, stock at 1, open circuit and short circuit. So most of the hardware testing techniques, they target to detect some of these types of faults. So that's why we call that hardware testing techniques are fault based techniques. So we design tests to check whether there is a stock at 0 fault, whether there is a stock at 1 fault, whether open circuit fault, etc. So in that sense, the hardware testing is much simpler compared to software testing, because the fault model of hardware is very simple and we have only fault based techniques, whereas in a software there are thousands of errors and you don't, many of the techniques are not fault based. They are not targeted to detect only one type of fault. They detect many types of faults. Now, before we discuss the methodologies, I think this is the last basic concept, is about a test case. A test case, it consists of a input value, the state at which it is given, and the test data is the input that is given, whereas a test case is not only the input value. So the test case consists of the test data as well as the predicted outputs and also the state at which the input is given. So a test case includes test data, that is the inputs, and also the predicted outputs and also the state of the system at which the input is to be given. Now this is another basic concept. Sometimes we talk about negative test cases. So what is a negative test case? A negative test case basically gives invalid inputs and checks if the system at least handles them. A positive test case is one which gives allowable inputs. For example, in a payroll program, let's say you enter the salary as a character in word, you enter in words. So will it cross? It should handle it gracefully. That is the purpose of negative test cases. So the purpose of negative testing is to check whether unexpected inputs are handled satisfactorily and the application does not crash. Now a test suite comprises of many test cases which have been designed. And each test case, as we were discussing earlier, consists of an input, the state of the system at which the input is applied and the expected output. Now let's look at an example of a test case. So let's say we are checking a library software. So we're trying to check the return book, whether the return book function is working well. So before we can execute the return book, give input here, we have to first check whether the book has been created, the member has borrowed the book, etc. So only then the return can take place. So this is the state of the system at which the book record exists and the book has been borrowed by a member, then only we can test the return book. If the members have not borrowed any book, we cannot test the return book. And then we give the input which book to be renewed and then observe the output and compare the expected output, compare with expected output. So it consists of three things: the input to be given, the state at which to be given, and the output, the expected output. And once the test case is executed, we need to record it. Typically, a typical company might use this kind of a format to record a test case execution and its results. So test case number, who is the created the test case, what it is supposed to do, at what state it is to be entered, that's precondition, what's the input, what's the expected output, and what should happen after the output has been produced, then when was it executed, who executed, what was the result, pass or fail, and then whether it has been fixed. So that's the way some companies record test cases. Now, what do the test professionals do? A tester, what does it do? One thing is test planning. So what type of testing will be carried out, for how long, etc. These require experienced people. Test case design. So these are experienced and qualified people. Execute test case. So these are semi-experienced and inexperienced. They are asked to execute the test cases. The test cases have been designed by more experienced testers, and semi-experienced and inexperienced, they do the test execution. Test result analysis, these are experienced people. Test tool support to execute automated test cases, these are also experienced people. And of course, there can be users, industry experts, etc. But then can't we just give random input and test it? why design test cases? So we'll just show one example saying that if we don't design test cases, then even after executing thousands of test cases, we might not have tested it properly. So if we have designed our test cases well, then we can say that, okay, we have executed using 1000 test cases or 10,000 test cases supposed to be tested well. But if the test cases are not designed well, just randomly selected test suite, then how many test cases don't make much sense. Just let's see one example. That this is the code. If x greater than y, max is equal to x, else we have done a mistake here. The programmer done a mistake. Should have been max equal to y. By mistake has written max equal to x. Now to detect this bug, only when x is smaller than y, this will get executed. Right? Now if all our test cases, so this is one test case where both these max equal to x and max equal to this part will also get executed. But suppose we keep on giving x is always larger than y, x is equal to 3, y equal to 2, x4, 3, 5, 1, etc. Even if we give hundreds of this, then this part will not execute and therefore bug will not get detected. So just the number of test cases here, 1000 will not mean anything. Only when it is designed properly like this, then there is a meaning of saying that we have executed using this many test cases, and it will take less effort and time, and that's the reason why we need to design test cases. So a well-designed test suite, in a well-designed test suite, each test case should try to detect different errors. Now let's see what are the test strategies. There are two main strategies here. One is the black box testing, which is also called as the usage-based testing, and the other is called as white box testing. And often white box testing is guided by the black box results. Let's see some test planning here. Let's say in our previous software that we developed, we had reviews detected 10% of the defects. Unit testing detected 40%, integration test detected 25%, system test detected 15%, and later customers reported 10%. So how do you use this data for test planning? So how much effort? Suppose you want to totally put, let's say, 100 man days of work into testing. So how will you distribute this? Of course, that distribution will depend where maximum problems are detected. So possibly 40% you will like to put here. Now let's say you are using several test techniques. Let's say you are using a combinatorial testing, you are using a boundary value testing, you are using equivalence testing, and you are using path coverage and so on. So different test techniques could detect different extents of bugs. Test technique 1 50%, test technique 2 30%, test technique 3 30%, 10%, and so on. So how do you use this for planning? So of course that indicates that we must put more effort in test technique 1. Now let's assume that there are many functionalities of our system, and the number of bugs per function is different. Function 1 had some percentage of bugs, some number of bugs, F2, F3 had hardly any bugs, F5 had the maximum number of bugs. So how do we plan testing? Of course, we have to put more effort into testing the functionality that had more bugs. in the release 2 of the test software must put more effort on F5. Now let's start discussion on unit testing. So as we discussed, after a coding of a unit is complete and it compiles successfully, we start unit testing. Actually, while asking questions and so on, we sometimes ask that when exactly do you start unit testing? Okay, the answer is that coding is complete and the code compiles successfully. Only after the code compiles, it's taken up for unit testing. And unit testing detects lot of bugs, and also the bugs can be easily corrected. The debugging effort is reduced if we find it during unit testing rather than integration or system testing. So this slide just shows that if we are doing unit testing, we have only this much. If the bug is here and we observed a failure, if we had done a unit testing, observed a failure, you have to just look this much. But if doing system testing, then we have to look the entire thing, search the entire thing to find the bug. So debugging cost would increase substantially if we don't do unit testing. So the search space is much smaller, easier to look at bugs. Now in unit testing, we are checking a function independently, but this function might be calling other functions, and therefore we need stubs. The stubs are actually dummy software, dummy programs that the tester writes, which provide very simple functionality that the unit calls. And the driver, the unit might have to be called by somebody to be executed, and this is what is the driver software. So the driver simulates the behavior of the function that calls and possibly supplies some data to the function being tested, and the stub simulates the behavior of the function that has not yet been written. So this is the procedure under test. The driver calls it and also provides values of some global variables here. See, this arrow shows that, and then the procedure under test, unit test, that calls a stub. Now let's have a small quiz here. So can unit testing be considered as a verification technique or a validation technique? So let me just see, there are some chat. So this is about the number of bugs that some have said about the problem, that quiz that we had given, that 60% effective, and each time a bug is fixed, there is a 15% chance of finding a bug, and some have asked about the answer to that, and there is some question. So the answer they have given to quiz 6 is verification. Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, the answer to quiz 6, unit testing is verification. Yes, that's correct. Now how do you design unit test cases? So we can take a black box approach, a white box approach, or a gray box approach. In a black box approach, we just look at the specification of the unit and design test cases. White box approach, we only look at the code, we don't look at the specification and design test case. In gray box, we just look at the design of the unit and design the test cases. So the black box approach is also called as functional testing, because we just look at the functional specification and design test cases. We don't look at the code. So this is again in the lighter vein, Dilbert cartoon. So Ashok comes and says, Wally, I discovered a deadly safety flaw in our product. Whom should I inform? Says, don't inform anyone. The stock would plunge and we would have a massive layoff. Your career would be ruined. Says, but my negligence can cause the death of a dozen of customers. And Wally, who is not very ethical actually, says, the first dozen is always the hardest. Compared to the black box testing, where we just look at the input, the functional specification and design test cases. In a white box testing, we look only at the code and design the test cases. So it is called as structural testing or code based testing. Now let's look at the black box testing techniques. So here we don't look at the code, only look at the specification and design test cases. The objective is that we should not give exhaustive input. The design should be such that we achieve as much as the exhaustive test input, much less effort. And there are many methodologies exist here. Equivalence class, boundary value, cause effect or decision table based testing. We'll see what's the difference between a cause effect and a decision table, the combinatorial testing. First, let's look at the equivalence class testing. The equivalence class testing is based on the idea that if the program behaves similar for some set of inputs, then possibly one input from that equivalence class should be enough. The program behaves similar way for every input, then you can test using one of the input. Just to give an example, let's say your program needs to work with many types of printers. So we have several types of Hewlett-Packard HP printers, you have several types of Epson printers, several types of Samsung printers and so on. So possibly you can assume that if it works well with one HP printer, it will work well for all the HP printers. So the HP printers form a equivalence class. Similarly, the Samsung printers will be equivalence class. You better test with one Samsung printer. So that's the main idea here in equivalence class, that if it works well for one input, it will work well for the other inputs in the equivalence class. So if we can somehow define the equivalence class, then it will work. We can just take one of the equivalence class and it should work well. So there is some question. Let me see if it is working. So how do we do the equivalence classes? How do we identify the classes? Okay, we can examine the input data and based on our experience, we can think for which input data it will behave similarly. Those will form the equivalent classes. We'll take some examples. Let's say we want to determine the type of a triangle. Given three sides of a triangle, our program prints what is the type of the triangle. So the different types of triangles are obviously equivalence classes. So we'll have to check with one isosceles, then possibly it will detect any input isosceles, one scalene, one equilateral. So these are the different equivalence classes. This is a simple example. So every functionality will have at least two equivalence class. One is the valid class, and it might have several subclasses, equivalence classes, and another is invalid set of inputs. These might also have subclasses. So we can define subclasses and the valid equivalence class and subclasses and the invalid equivalence class. For example, in our triangle problem that we give three sides and our function tells what's the type of the triangle, then the valid equivalence classes can be scalene, equilateral or isosceles. The invalid inputs may be, let's say, negative values and so on. So once we have found the equivalence classes among the valid and invalid values, we then randomly select one of the values from each equivalence class, and that forms our equivalence class test cases. So let's say some program consists of a range of values. Let's say it takes reads a number and then let's say prints it out in number in words, and it can take between 1 to 5,000. So there is one valid class, and the invalid there are less than 1 and less than 2 types of invalid classes. The invalid is broken into 2 subclasses which are greater than 5,000, less than 1, and then there is one valid class, equivalence class. But if there is enumerated set of values, like let's say it takes only 3 values, A, B and C. So let me see, there are some questions. So the question is, okay, so many are asking about the question that we had posed about this error that remained. So let me just work it out here. So we had said that there are 5 stages. Since there are many who are asking about the question, no, sorry, the answer, I'm just writing down. So there are 5 stages, and each stage detects 60% is detected, 60% errors detected, 40 escape, and initially 1000 were present. Now after the first application, we will have 1000 into 40 have escaped, and out of this 60, 15% will again get added. So 15% of 60 will be 60 into 15, so that is about 9. Out of 60, 15% of 60 is equal to 9. So 49 will be so 0.49 of this will be present. All right. So 49% will be present, or 49 by 100. So 5 applications of that will be to the power 5. So this is roughly half, right? So half is 1 by 2 to the power 5 is 2 to 4, 8, 16, 32. So 1000 by 32 roughly. Actual answer will be 49 by 100 to the power 5. So this will be 396 for 31 point something. So roughly is equal to 32 bugs. That will be the answer. So let me just repeat the solution. So we had 5 stages of testing. Initially there are 1000 bugs. 60% gets detected, but each detected one, while fixing them, they don't get completely fixed. 15% still remain. So 15% of 60 is 9. And therefore total bugs at the end of a stage is 49. So 49 by 100, 49 remain out of 100 and 5 of such, and therefore it is roughly equal to 1 by 2, 49 by 100. So I have written 1 by 2 to the power 5, which is equal to 32. So roughly about 32 bugs will remain. With equivalence class partitioning, so if there is an enumerated set of values, it's only 3 values, let's say it takes only 3 names or something. So then we have one equivalence class for this set of values, and then another equivalence class for the invalid values. So this is the simplest example. It takes 1 to 5000 values between 1 to 5000 and computes the square root of the number. So what will be the equivalence classes? Here any one value between 1 to 5000, the invalid values more than 5000 and less than 1. So 3 values will check it out. So 3 values may be 5, minus 5, 500 and 6000. So for this simple problem, for equivalence class testing approach, we will have 3 values, -5, 500 and 6000. Now let's look at another example. Suppose we are trying to test a function called as fetch URL, and it takes a URL as an argument and returns a string. So what will be the equivalence classes for this? Okay, one definition of equivalence class can be that the type of the protocol used in the URL, is it HTTP, HTTPS, FTP, file, etc. Those are the different equivalence classes. We can have another definition of equivalence classes, which are the type of the file being retrieved for display, for example HTML, GIF, JPEG, plain text, etc. So there is no single equivalence class many times, and our definition or our understanding of the system regarding the equivalence class many times determines whether our equivalence class testing is satisfactory or not. Let's take this example, another example. Okay, I should have written example 3 here. So let's say the input is an integer between -99 and 99. So what will be the valid equivalence classes and the invalid equivalence classes? And the second problem is we want to enter a phone number. It consists of an area code, something like 11, etc., and a 3-digit. Okay, the area code is between 11 to 9999. Area code is between 11 to 9999, and also there is a suffix, is a 6-digit telephone number. So what are the valid equivalence classes, invalid equivalence classes, and the subclasses? So the valid equivalence class, as it says, lie between -99 to 99, and the invalid equivalence classes less than -99, greater than 99, and also malformed numbers 12 minus 1 minus 2 minus 3, etc., non-numeric strings, etc., junk, etc., characters. Whereas for this problem we have several equivalence classes. That is the first equivalence class is we choose between 111, 999, and for each of the digit between 0 to 9. So these define the equivalence classes, and then the invalid equivalence classes also give invalid number, invalid area code, or invalid phone number. But one thing that we must observe from this example here is that when we have two different parts to an input, for example a function takes years of education and age. Now based on age, possibly we will have two equivalence classes, let's say young and old, and let's say years of education, maybe school, college and doctoral, let's assume. So in a weak equivalence class testing, we test some input tests whether age is young or old. This tests young and old, and the different years of education, school, college, doctoral, etc., some of them also test them. So this is called as weak equivalence class testing. Whereas in a strong equivalence class testing, we check all possible combinations. So young and school, young and college, young and doctoral, old and school, old and college, old and doctoral. But we will call it a robust equivalence class when we also include the invalid values. So one value is invalid here, age is invalid, sorry, the age is valid but the years of education is invalid. So here both are invalid, the age and the years of education are both invalid, and here age is invalid but is school, and so on. So this is called as a strong robust equivalence class testing. Now let's do one quiz. So need to design equivalence class test cases. A bank pays different rates of interest on a deposit depending on the deposit period. 3% for deposit up to 15 days, 4% for deposit to 15 days to 180 days, 6% to 180 days to 1 year, 7% over 1 year but less than 3 years, 8% for 3 years and above. So can you try this problem? It is a simple problem because there is only one variable, that is the deposit period. The next problem will be slightly more complicated than this. So each of these will form equivalence class, this simple thing. This is just one variable. But then we might have a problem in two variables. For example, for deposit less than 1 lakh, the rate of interest can be 6%, 7% and 8% depending on the period. Whereas for more than 1 lakh, the rate can be 7%, 8%, 9%. So how do we design test cases for this? So we have to fall back on the equivalence class for two variables and design test cases for this. Similarly, we have another one, design equivalence class test cases for a program that takes two strings, two variables. Just check here, see here. Maximum length is 20 and 5. Checks if the second is a substring of the first. So please try these three problems. Should be able to do based on what we discussed about equivalence class testing. The difficulty, please raise a question, we will solve it out here. Now let's look at the boundary value testing. In boundary value testing, the heuristic is that just testing the equivalence class is not enough, because the programmers typically do errors at the boundary, possibly purely due to psychological factors. So we have to always consider the boundary values in addition to representative equivalence class values. For example, programmer might use less instead of less than equal to. So if we take the value at the boundary which is equal to, we might see the error. But if we just simply consider equivalence class, we may not see this error. So let's see one example. Let's say employment applications are processed based on a person's age. If the person applying is 0 to 16 years, we do not hire. If it is between 16 to 18, we hire on part-time basis. If it is 18 to 65, we hire full-time. And if it is 65 to 100, we do not hire. But again, in this problem that we have posed, there is a mistake here. 16 is do not hire or 16 is hire part-time basis, because this includes 0 to 16 and this is 16 to 18. So if you possibly wrote the code for this, then it will look something like this. So if age is greater than 0 and less than 16, less than equal to 16, it is less than equal to 16 and less than 18, etc. This, so if you give the value 16, you will find the problem. So we can correct our problem. 0 to 15 don't hire, 16 to 17 can hire on part-time basis, 18 to 54 hire full-time, 55 to 99 don't hire. But then again, the problem here is that we have not said what about somebody applied with age -3 or 101. Our requirements don't tell about this. So we can write the corresponding code here, no part-time, full-time, etc. So the boundary value testing can detect this type of problems. So in a boundary value testing, we not only identify the equivalence classes, but also take the values on the boundary. Just see here, the one that is on the boundary, just outside the boundary and just inside the boundary. So we need to take all these three values and boundary value testing. So now with the same example, the boundary value test cases will include 0, which is just outside, 1, which is the boundary, 2 just inside. This is the equivalence class. Okay. Now on this boundary 5000 just outside boundary, just inside boundary. So the boundary value test cases for this example will be these 6 values. Now let's see that a program that reads age of an employee and computes the average age. So assume that the valid age is between 1 to 150. So what will be the boundary value tests for this? So we'll have to take the minimum boundary, immediately above the minimum, invalid value which is less than minimum, between minimum and at 150, more than 150, just less than 150, and so on. So for this example, if we ignore the invalid values, so we have 5 values. At the minimum, immediately above the minimum, between minimum and maximum, immediately below the maximum, and at the maximal boundary. So if we have multiple parameters, let's say 2 fields, input field 1 and 2. So one thing is that we can choose each of them independently. So then we have 5 plus 5, 10 sets. But then they may be, even on an independent one, we can do like this, that we are not considering the invalid values here. There's the valid values. One is just on the border here on this side, another on the border on this variable age, just inside the border, just on this lower border. So these become 9 values. So for in general, if there are Z inputs, so we will need 4Z plus 1. So that's what is summarized here, is that if we have 2 variables X and Y, then we need 9 values. The single fault assumption says that if we have multiple parameters to a function, then failure rarely occurs as the result of simultaneous occurrence to 2 parameters. So typically one of the parameter misbehaves. So under this assumption, we can hold one value at its valid value or a nominal value and let the other values assume the extreme ones. So in that case, let's assume that program takes a string. It reads numeric value and then converts it into string. Let's say it reads 55 and converts it to 7 ASCII string and so on. Now the boundary is 47 and 58. For a single variable, it's simple. Now let's see the combinations of variables. We'll just see that. Now for when we consider the invalid values, then we call it a robustness testing. So in that case, we need 7 test cases. That includes the values invalid, 2 invalid values. So if we consider the invalid value with 2 independent inputs, then we consider these invalid values, 4 invalid values. So the total number of test cases will be 3, 4 12 plus 1, 13. And if there are n input variables, then the total number of test cases will be 6n plus 1. But then the limitations to boundary value testing are how to handle the Boolean variables, because these are only true, false, and how about the non-numerical values, etc. So let's have one more quiz. We want to design the equivalence class and the boundary value for a program that takes 3 variables A, B, C. We want to design a black box test suite, that is equivalence class and the boundary value, for a function that solves a quadratic equation. So you give A, B, C as input. It takes A, B, C as the parameter and then prints the solution. So what will be the equivalence classes for this? Okay, as we started earlier, one are the valid input, invalid inputs. Valid input, real solutions and complex solutions, and under real solution, coincident and unique solutions. Now we'll start another black box testing called as the decision table based testing. But then unfortunately we are running out of time. So we have time enough to answer one or two questions. So if anybody has any questions, please raise that, we'll answer that. Otherwise we'll stop here. And if you have any questions, please work out the quizzes, and if there are any questions, we'll just work out tomorrow. We're just running out of time today. We'll stop here and we'll continue from this point tomorrow.